Wes Streeting was one of the loudest voices campaigning against the Labour Party between 2015 and 2019. He was the MP who even said during an election campaign that he didn't think Jeremy Corbyn should be Prime Minister, which meant any Labour members watching Question Time this week were in for a shock. Asked whether Labour backed an upcoming railway strike by the RMT, Streeting said this.
Well, I wish they weren't going ahead, and so does the RMT. I listened to their General Secretary, Mick Lynch, on LBC just the other week, saying that he doesn't want his members out on strike. I think people don't realise that when workers go on strike, they lose a day's pay. And I don't think anyone wants to be losing a day's pay against the current backdrop.
But do you support... The question is, do you support the strikes?
Why are they going on strike? To defend their pay, jobs, terms and conditions. That is what any of us would be doing for our own jobs, pay, terms and conditions in the current climate. What needs to be done to avoid these strikes going ahead? The government needs to do what the government should be doing, which is providing a table for people to get around to try and negotiate a fair settlement for the workers that keeps the trains running and treats people fairly. Instead, what they're trying to do is pour petrol on the fire, pick a fight with the railway unions. They hope that starting a fire on railways will distract from Boris Johnson's problems. That's not responsible government. And when you've got the rail operators saying, oh, we want to negotiate, you've got the RMT saying we don't want to go on strike, it's the responsibility of government to get people around the table. And I'll tell you what might fix our broken railways. Instead of people paying high fares in this country that subsidise fares in France, in Germany, in Holland, because they own our railways and we don't, why don't we finally get a grip on our own railways, put them back in public ownership so that we can reinvest the profits in better services and lower fares for people in Britain?
You've not actually answered the question. Do you support the upcoming transport strikes, yes or no?
Well, as I say, I prefer they weren't.
You wish they weren't happening, but do you support them?
No, but genuinely, look, put it this way, if I were a member of the RMT and my jobs were at risk like this, then I'd be voting to go on strike and I'd be voting to defend my job's terms and conditions. If I were a government minister right now, it's not my job to be on the picket line, or it's not my job to be condemning unions, it's my job to solve the problem, to get people around the table, to make sure passengers aren't inconvenienced.
Now, I watched that. I have to say I watched it on Twitter because I struggled to watch a whole episode of Question Time. But I was like, wow, for a moment, like, whoa, Wes Streeting sounds pretty, good. It's very well put, very right on. He's saying, I think the bravest thing he said there was, if I was in the RMT, I would have voted to strike, strong. This is very far away from, Ed Miliband saying the strikes are wrong and people need to come to the table. He was explaining there very coherently why trade unions are important. Then I remember that this is not Wes Streeting having a conversion to being a leftist. Well, it's probably not. No, I can't read his mind. This is probably, I imagine, Wes Streeting building up to his long-awaited, long-trailed leadership campaign to become Labour leader. Now, we know when it came to Keir Starmer, he was very rightly, correctly informed that if he wanted to become Labour leader, he would have to say that he was very left-wing. He gave us 10 pledges, which looked pretty left-wing, said very left-wing things, had that video at the beginning of the campaign. Do you remember? I support protests. I support the miners. I've taken the cops to court. Once he's Labour leader, anything the cops say is correct. Protest movements and direct action, needs to be stopped. A complete about turn. I wouldn't be surprised if Wes Streeting is doing the same. And it is worth saying, it should go without saying, Wes Streeting is not left-wing. As NUS president, his main innovation was to drop the union support for free education. He told The Independent, moving to the right on tuition fees makes sense. After the NUS, Streeting went on to work for Progress, that's the Blairite think tank on the Labour right. After that, he worked at Stonewall, the LGBT charity, fairly neutral thing to do. And that was before heading to PricewaterhouseCoopers to work as a private consultant to public sector organisations. In 2015, he was elected to Parliament, where he became one of the most vocal opponents of Jeremy Corbyn in the Labour Party on the Labour benches, and that most often involved the anti-Semitism row and a so-called People's Vote. But he also memorably waded in when Labour banned McDonald's from having a stand at their 2016 conference. So at the time, Streeting told The Sun on Sunday, "The ban smacks of a snobby attitude towards fast food restaurants and people who work or eat at them. McDonald's may not be the trendy falafel bar that some people in politics like to hang out at, but it's enjoyed by families across the country." Now, it turned out the ban had nothing to do with vegetarianism and was rather because McDonald's weren't recognising their employees' trade union. Still, a good opportunity to give the Murdoch-owned press an anti-Corbyn quote. Finally, in May this year, Wes became the first member of Keir Starmer's shadow cabinet to tour Israel. He did so with Labour Friends of Israel. All in all, one might think it would be harder for Streeting then to put together a soft focus campaign video pretending he's left-wing than it was for Keir Starmer. But, and this is important, it is an open question as to how much that will matter this time around. With so many left-wingers leaving the party in the last 2 years, the electorate is much more open to centrism than it was in 2019, well, it seems to be. So, for example, a YouGov poll in 2020 found that 29% of Labour members were willing to see moderate compromises on Labour values to get elected. That's now gone up to 42%, and those willing to see large compromises have gone up from 12 to 15%. Aaron, I want your take on Wes Streeting's intervention. Is he pitching left to try and win the leadership election? And given the left's exodus from the Labour Party, might he not even need to?
I think the membership is still quite left-wing, Michael, on policies. I think the membership still likes what Keir Starmer was offering in early 2020. I think that's probably still the sort of the centre ground of the party. Of course, the people that turn out, the people that get voted onto executives, the people who aren't, mothballed and can run for council positions and become parliamentary candidates and so on, they're rigging all of that. We wrote a story about that in Stroud. Of course, we've seen it in Wakefield. We saw it in the West of England mayoral selection last year. But the membership, I think, is still to the left of Keir Starmer, in fact. I mean, they still, for instance, the membership still has a pretty good sort of sentiment towards Jeremy Corbyn. The membership thinks that he should be allowed back in the party, for instance. So I wouldn't buy the argument that somehow they're going to like Wes Streeting. I think they want to eliminate homelessness, address the housing crisis, they support public ownership and so on. What I find out and about when I talk to people, I met a lovely woman in Hay-on-Wye last weekend. She was supporting Starmer because she said, well, that's what you have to do to get in power and then you'll change things. And of course, I didn't say this to her, but I thought, you're delusional, okay? To an extent, yes. And I thought that's what Keir Starmer was doing in his 2020 pitch. I think actually the man he ran as, the candidate he ran as, would actually be quite popular, would probably get elected with a majority, I think. But as we saw with focus groups, which came out earlier this week, he's instead seen as very evasive, not standing for anything, slippery. And I think Streeting's probably looking at that, and there's a twofold logic here. Firstly, he's trying to appeal to the membership, but also, Michael, I think he's trying to appeal to the public. The Labour right, people around Mandelson, aren't completely stupid. They know that there is a zeitgeist which has shifted around public ownership. Now, they're not going to support public ownership, but, I can see them fixating on one thing, trains, and that's it. And everything else, and you do that to buy a certain credibility around economic populism, which, by the way, voters on both the left and the right. Levelling up was the appropriation of Corbynism on regional equality by the Conservatives. And so I think there is an element, yes, of trying to appeal to the Labour membership, but I also think to the public at large, Michael. They look at the polling, they know how popular this stuff is. And it was remarkable to me to see Wes Streeting use the language of economic populism. I thought it was crazy. He was talking about, foreign-owned companies benefiting from us paying high fares while we have a crap service, which is overpriced. This was stuff that was verboten on British media 5 years ago. People like you or me might have been saying it on Sky or the BBC, but not many others. And I think to an extent, the Labour right now acknowledges that is the terrain of politics. If they want to win, they'll at least have to acknowledge that. Now, like you say, if he does become the Labour leader, perfectly possible. I think he probably would be the favourite. He would be the most right-wing person to ever become leader of the Labour Party. And I would implore members to look at his record and to not make the same mistakes they did with Keir Starmer.
All of us here at Novara Media are working harder than ever to keep scrutinising establishment politicians and the media barons who protect them. We don't have billionaire funders. We don't have advertising partnerships. We're funded entirely by you. If you've ever thought about supporting us, now's the time to go to novaramedia.com/support and donate anything you can from just £1 per month. Defy the corporate media, join our monthly supporters and help build our supporter base to 10,000 strong.